Hello, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. The chandeliers in the grand ballroom of the Bryant Park Hotel shimmered like a constellation, casting golden light over New York's elite legal crowd. Today marked the 20th anniversary of Whitmore & Company, the city's most prestigious law firm, and the air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes and proud speeches. At the center of the event stood Julian Whitmore, the 32-year-old CEO and legal prodigy, towering like a statue. His tailored black suit hugged his broad shoulders, and his sharp gray eyes scanned the room with the commanding presence of a courtroom general. But tonight, those eyes were clouded, not by strategy, but by a rare decision: to drown his stress in whiskey. Julian was no drunk. He prided himself on control, on dismantling opponents with razor-sharp arguments without breaking a sweat. But the past week had been a nightmare. A board meeting taut as a tightrope, with directors questioning his overly ambitious expansion plans, followed by a call from his mother, Eleanor Whitmore, who spent 20 minutes lecturing him on his failure to find a suitable wife. "You're not getting any younger, Julian. The family needs an heir." Her words echoed as he downed another glass, the whiskey's burn soothing the sharp edges of his mind. By midnight, he was slurring through a conversation with a junior associate, his usual eloquence reduced to clumsy jokes about corporate law. Half a block away, in the dimly lit bar called the Rusty Gavel, Riley Quinn was battling her own intoxication. The 28-year-old lawyer had just quit her job at Kessler & Klein after exposing her boss's bribery scheme with a pharmaceutical giant. She'd hoped for justice. Instead, she got a settlement and a veiled threat to stay quiet. Now, with a dwindling savings account and a shaky reputation, Riley was on her third martini, her auburn hair spilling from its neat bun, mingling with giggles and mutters about corrupt lawyers who think they own the world. The bartender, a kind-eyed guy named Marco, slid a glass of water toward her. Riley waved it off, declaring, "Water's for quitters, Marco. Tonight, I'm the champion of something." The fateful twist. The universe, it turns out, has a cruel sense of humor. At the Bryant Park Hotel, a system glitch, caused by an overwhelmed concierge and a crashed server, swapped Riley's room with Julian's. As she stumbled out of the bar, her heels clacking on the sidewalk, she clutched the key card she'd grabbed from the desk without checking. That card, meant for Julian's penthouse, sent her straight to the elevator. She didn't notice the PH lighting up on the panel or question why the room she entered was a masterpiece of marble and glass, far beyond her budget. She kicked off her shoes, collapsed onto the king-size bed, and passed out within minutes. Meanwhile, Julian was escorted to his room by his loyal assistant after his rare lapse in control. Fumbling with his tie, muttering about incompetent directors, he crashed onto the same bed, oblivious to the stranger already occupying half of it. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, stabbing Julian's temples like a gavel's blow. He groaned, his head pounding as if struck in a courtroom. His mouth was bitter, and his usually sharp senses were dulled by a hangover's haze. Blinking, he registered the unfamiliar silk sheets and a faint jasmine scent in the air. Then he froze. Inches away, spilling across the pillow, was a cascade of auburn hair. A woman, in his bed. Julian shot upright, heart racing as he tried to piece together fractured memories. He didn't do this. Bring strangers to his room, lose control. His eyes darted to the woman, now stirring, her face half hidden by the sheet. She wore a rumpled black dress, one sleeve slipping off her shoulder, mascara smudged in a strangely captivating way. Captivating or not, she was an intruder. "Who are you?" Julian's voice was low, icy, laced with suspicion as he leaned closer. Riley's eyes snapped open, green and sharp despite her grogginess. She yelped, scrambling upright, clutching the sheet to her chest like a shield. She stared at Julian, tall, disheveled, glaring with an intensity that could unnerve anyone. But Riley Quinn was no ordinary woman. She was a lawyer, and she'd face scarier foes than a CEO in a wrinkled suit. "I'm the one who should be asking that," she shot back, voice hoarse but firm. "This is my room. You're trespassing, buddy. Your room? Julian raised an eyebrow, his tone dripping with skepticism. He gestured around the suite. Minimalist decor, private bar, a sweeping view of Manhattan's skyline. This is my penthouse. I've owned it for 3 years. You're the one trespassing. Riley blinked, her mind reeling. She vaguely recalled the bar, the key card, the elevator. But a penthouse? She glanced around, her confidence faltering for a second before she rallied. Oh, nice try, self-appointed lawyer guy. I have a key card, a booking contract, and a headache that proves I belong here. You, on the other hand, look like you crawled out of a losing trial and stumbled into the wrong bed. She pointed at him, her voice steely. Take one more step toward me, and I'll sue you for assault. Julian narrowed his eyes, but the corner of his mouth twitched at her audacity. She wasn't just stubborn, she knew the law and how to wield it. Assault? He repeated, deliberately stepping closer, his voice low and dangerous. You're in my bed, in my suite, and you're threatening me? I could call the police right now for trespassing, and trust me, I have a legal team that would ensure you never set foot in a courtroom again. Riley laughed, the sound sharp and clear in the room. Trespassing? This isn't a heist movie, Mr. High and Mighty. I got in with a key card. And newsflash, this bed is big enough for an entire law firm, so don't act like I invaded your personal space. She stood, wrapping the sheet around herself, her eyes defiant. If you want to sue, go ahead. I'll represent myself, and I'll win, because I have physical evidence. This key card is Exhibit A. They stood feet apart, glaring like opposing counsel in a heated trial. Julian's heart raced, not from anger, but from the sheer nerve of this woman challenging him word for word. Riley, meanwhile, felt an odd thrill. She didn't know who this guy was, but she wasn't about to lose this case. Fine, Julian said, crossing his arms. Let's handle this like civilized people. Show me your key card. Riley smirked, sensing an opportunity. Only if you show yours first. He pulled his card from the jacket slung on the floor, holding it up. She rummaged through her purse, triumphantly producing hers. They exchanged cards, their expressions shifting from smug to bewildered. Both cards were identical, clearly marked. Penthouse Suite A. What the? Riley muttered, her bravado wavering. Julian narrowed his eyes, his voice low. This, he said, is a serious legal issue. Before either could say more, a knock interrupted. A frantic concierge stood outside, apologizing profusely for the system error. We're so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. Ms. Quinn. There was a server glitch. We'll comp the room and... Comp the room? Riley cut in, incredulous. You let me sleep in the same bed as a stranger. And you let an unauthorized person into my penthouse, Julian added, his voice cold as ice. The concierge stammered, but Riley and Julian had already turned back to glare at each other, each clutching their key card. The room crackled with tension, not just from conflict, but from an indefinable spark. A challenge, a twist of fate, like the opening statement in a case neither was ready to face. The penthouse of Julian Whitmore at the Bryant Park Hotel still carried the scent of tension from this morning's confrontation. Midday sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating the walnut dining table where Julian and Riley sat across from each other, like two lawyers preparing to sign a ceasefire. But there was no ceasefire here, only an unresolved legal skirmish, with both determined not to yield to their opponent. Julian, having regained his usual composure, sat upright in a crisp white dress shirt, holding an espresso. His gray eyes studied Riley with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. This woman, with her auburn hair tied high and eyes sharp as a blade, was unlike anyone he'd ever met. She wasn't intimidated by him, a rarity in a world where the reputation of Whitmore and Company made adversaries tremble. But what intrigued him more was the information he'd just received from his assistant. Riley Quinn, former lawyer at Kessler and Klein, was the one who dared to expose her boss's bribery scheme with Apex Pharmaceuticals, a former client of Whitmore & Co. She wasn't just stubborn, she was reckless, a lone lawyer bold enough to poke a hornet's nest. Riley, in a borrowed business dress from the hotel's service, sipped her black coffee, masking the lingering headache from last night's bender. She knew she was at a disadvantage. No job, no concrete evidence to continue her fight against her former boss, and now stuck in the apartment of an arrogant CEO. But Riley Quinn never backed down, especially not to someone like Julian Whitmore, who seemed to think he could control the world with a snap of his fingers. Julian set his coffee down, his voice low and cool. "Ms. Quinn, I've looked into your background. Kessler and Klein, bribery allegations, and now the center of a legal mess. You're no lightweight." Riley raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk. "Thanks for the compliment, Mr. Whitmore. But if you're going to investigate me, at least buy me a proper breakfast first. This coffee doesn't make up for waking up next to a stranger." Julian ignored the jab, cutting to the chase. "I'm conducting an internal investigation into some transactions involving Apex Pharmaceuticals. I need a sharp lawyer who isn't afraid to fight and, most importantly, can't be bought. But I don't trust easily, especially not someone who ended up in my room like last night's accident." Riley laughed, the sound ringing out like a challenge. "Accident? You talk like I hacked the hotel system to share a bed with you. But let's say you need a lawyer. Why should I work for you when you clearly think I'm a legal liability?" Julian leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Because I can give you what you need: resources, access, and a chance to continue your fight against Kessler and Klein. But there's a condition." He paused, his voice dropping as if reading a contract clause. 30 days. You'll live in this apartment, work directly under me. I'll assess whether you're worth my trust." Riley froze, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "Live? Here? With you?" She gestured around the lavish space, leather sofas, stainless steel bar, a view of Bryant Square. "Are you hiring me as a lawyer or for a relationship contract?" Julian's lips twitched into a rare smile, briefly softening his stern face. "I don't pay for relationships, Ms. Quinn. This is about justice. Want to take down people like your old boss? Prove you're good enough to be on my team." Riley leaned back, her mind racing. She knew this was a golden opportunity. Whitmore and Company had a massive legal database, top-tier research teams, and access to the documents she needed to expose her former boss. But living with Julian Whitmore? The man was arrogant, dangerous, and worse, capable of unsettling her, a risk Riley couldn't afford. Yet she had no choice. Her bank account was screaming, and her case against Kessler and Klein required resources she couldn't muster alone. She took a deep breath, flashing a confident smile. "Fine, Whitmore, but I don't sign anything without reading it thoroughly, and I have my own conditions." Julian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What conditions?" Riley stood, strode to his desk, and grabbed a sheet of paper and a pen from the drawer as if she owned the place. She began writing, her voice firm. "Clause 1. I have unrestricted access to Whitmore and Company's legal database for the purpose of pursuing justice. Clause 2. No one, including you, may invade my personal space, including but not limited to entering my bedroom, commenting on my private life, or attempting to control my schedule." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I'm here for people like my old boss not to win, Whitmore. Not for you." Julian watched her, struck by her precision and sharpness. She didn't just know the law, she knew how to play it. He took the paper, scanning the handwritten clauses in her bold script. "You draft contracts like you're prepping for $1 million lawsuit," he remarked, his tone tinged with admiration. "Because I'm always ready for $1 million lawsuit," Riley replied, crossing her arms. "And if you think I'll let you control me just because I need this job, you're mistaken. I'm a lawyer, not your contract employee." Julian nodded, impressed by her resolve. "All right, I'll have a formal contract drawn up, including your clauses. But a heads up, these 30 days won't be easy. I don't tolerate mistakes, and I'll be watching you closely." Riley smirked, her eyes glinting with defiance. "Watch me? Go ahead, Whitmore. But don't be surprised if I'm the one making you rethink your law books." That afternoon, the formal contract arrived via email, thicker than a court filing. Riley sat on the sofa, laptop on her lap, reading each line with the focus of a lawyer preparing for trial. She took notes, highlighted, and even added a 3-page addendum detailing everything from kitchen usage hours to a minimum distance during arguments. no less than 1 meter, to avoid personal space violations. Julian, standing at the bar a few steps away, pretended to read the news but was actually watching her. He'd never seen anyone approach a cohabitation contract with the seriousness of a courtroom battle. "Planning to turn this place into a legal zone?" he asked, half joking. Riley didn't look up, still typing. "If I have to live with a CEO lawyer like you, then yes, I need everything as clear as a court ruling. No loopholes, no surprises." Julian chuckled, a rare sound that made Riley pause for a second. He stepped over, placing a mug of herbal tea in front of her. "Call it a temporary truce," he said. "But don't think I'll go easy on you just because you can draft a contract." Riley took the mug, raising an eyebrow. "Truce? I don't do truces, Whitmore. I win." She sipped, hiding a smile as he shook his head, his eyes flickering with something. Amusement? Curiosity? She wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. The next 30 days would be a legal battle, and perhaps something more. The contract was signed that evening under the penthouse's warm golden lights. Riley signed with a decisive flourish, while Julian signed with the calm of someone used to million-dollar deals. But as they exchanged copies, their hands brushed, and both froze for a moment. Riley pulled back first, fussing with her hair. Julian cleared his throat, turning to grab a glass of water. "Tomorrow 8 a.m., he said, his voice back to professional. "You'll start with the Apex files. Don't be late." Riley nodded, her eyes fixed on him. "I'm never late, Whitmore. And you'd better brace yourself because I'm not just here to work. I'm here to make you rethink what a lawyer can do." She turned, heading to the temporary hotel room he'd arranged, leaving Julian alone in the vast apartment. He looked at the contract on the table, Riley's words like a declaration of war. And for the first time in years, Julian Whitmore felt a spark of excitement. Not for a case, but for a woman bold enough to challenge his entire world. Julian Whitmore's penthouse, once as cold as a law office, now buzzed with an unfamiliar energy. The glass walls overlooking Manhattan's skyline seemed brighter, not from the sunlight, but from Riley Quinn's presence. In just 3 days of living together, she'd turned the icy space into an unwitting home, filled with lively jazz each morning, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and a vibrant chaos that Julian found both infuriating and undeniably captivating. On Wednesday morning, Riley stood in the kitchen, wearing an oversized t-shirt and shorts, swaying to Ella Fitzgerald while making an omelet. She'd declared herself the apartment's hunger savior after discovering Julian's fridge held only filtered water, espresso, and an expired tub of organic butter. "A CEO like you lives like this?" she'd teased, holding up the butter like evidence in court. "This is a crime against nutrition, Whitmore." Julian, seated at the dining table with his laptop and a stack of files, tried to ignore the music and the smell of frying eggs. He wore a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, his gray eyes fixed on the screen. But he couldn't deny it. Riley was a distraction. Not because she was loud, though she was very loud, but because she turned everything into a legal battle, from picking music to organizing documents. Yesterday, she cleared the chaotic pile of files on his desk, sorting them alphabetically and marking them with colored pens. "Consider it charity," she'd said, winking. "This place needs a lawyer who knows how to organize." "Quinn," Julian said, his voice low but tinged with irritation. "Can you turn off that speaker? I'm trying to review a $50 million contract here." Riley spun around, wielding a spatula like a gavel. "Oh, my apologies, Mr. CEO, but jazz is freedom of speech, protected by the First Amendment. And if you want to work efficiently, eat breakfast. I don't need my boss passing out from hunger mid-case." Julian raised an eyebrow, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "I don't pass out, and I don't need you managing my diet." "Right, because you're clearly thriving on expired butter," Riley shot back, sliding a plate of omelet and toast in front of him. "Eat, Whitmore. I don't want to be sued for letting the CEO starve." Julian looked at the plate, then at her. Something in Riley's green eyes, both challenging and genuine, made it impossible to refuse. He picked up the fork, took a bite, and though he wouldn't admit it, the omelet was better than any breakfast he'd had at a five-star restaurant. Riley's work at Whitmore and Company kicked off at a breakneck pace. Julian assigned her a stack of files on Apex Pharmaceuticals, demanding she analyze suspicious transactions within 48 hours. "I want every error, every legal loophole," he said, his voice as stern as a judge's. "Don't disappoint me, Quinn." Riley didn't. Within 3 minutes, she spotted a flawed clause in an Apex stock transfer agreement, a minor error that could have cost Whitmore and Company millions if left uncorrected. She slid the contract across the table. The error circled in red and said, Clause 14.2 Whitmore. They deliberately used may instead of shall to dodge payment obligations. A dirty lawyer trick, but I've seen it a dozen times. Julian read her note, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "Not bad," he said, his tone neutral but unable to hide his respect. "But don't get cocky, this is just the start." Riley smirked, leaning back in her chair. "Cocky? I'm just doing my job. And if you want to keep me, step up your game. I don't like working with slow lawyers." That comment sparked an argument, one of dozens they had daily. They bickered over everything, from tax law interpretations to who left a coffee mug on the table. But these weren't the tense battles of a courtroom. They crackled with energy, like a perfectly staged verbal sparring match, often ending with one of them laughing. One afternoon, while Riley analyzed documents, she accidentally spilled coffee on an old contract of Julian's. He stared at the spreading brown stain, his face expressionless. "Quinn, you just destroyed company property. I could sue you for negligent damage." Riley burst out laughing, unfazed. "Sue me? Go ahead, but I'll counter-sue for leaving a critical document unprotected on the table. That's negligence by the plaintiff, Mr. Whitmore." She winked, wiping the stain clean with a napkin. "And I'd win, because I have evidence. This apartment is too messy for efficient work." Julian shook his head, but a rare smile broke through. "You're a legal nuisance, Quinn." "And you love it," she replied, her tone playful but her eyes glinting with something dangerous. On Saturday night, Riley claimed the living room to review files. She sat cross-legged on the sofa, surrounded by papers and her laptop, Nora Jones playing softly from the speaker. Julian walked in, fresh from the office, still in his black suit with his tie loosened. He paused, taking in the scene. Riley, hair loosely tied, chewing on a pen, muttering about vague indemnification clauses. Something about this moment, her absolute focus, the way she'd made the apartment her own, made his heart skip. "Don't you ever get tired?" he asked, sitting in the armchair across from her, a glass of red wine in hand. Riley looked up, shrugging. "Tired? I'm a lawyer, Whitmore. We're trained to survive on coffee and adrenaline. You, on the other hand, look like you just lost a major case." Julian chuckled, swirling his wine. "I don't lose, Quinn, but I'll admit, you're doing better than I expected." Riley raised an eyebrow, feigning shock. "Oh my God, is that a compliment from Julian Whitmore? I need to record this for court evidence." He leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "Want evidence? I can provide it, but you won't like the consequences." They fell silent, the air between them suddenly heavy. Riley broke the moment with a joke. "You know, boss, your face when you sleep. It's ridiculously goofy. I saw it yesterday when you passed out on the sofa with those files." Julian narrowed his eyes, but his voice was soft, almost teasing. "I could sue you for violating my personal image, Quinn. That's a privacy breach." Riley laughed loudly, clapping her hands. "Sue me? Fine. I'll represent myself, and I'll win, because I have a witness. That sofa. It'll testify you were snoring like a drunken lawyer." Julian laughed, a rare, warm sound that made Riley pause. She'd never heard him laugh like that. Not the polite chuckle of a CEO, but a real laugh that lit up his face. She looked down at her files, hiding the warmth spreading in her chest. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Arguments, teasing, and unspoken moments of melting. Riley began noticing Julian's habits, how he tapped his pen when stressed, how he let his coffee cool before drinking. Julian, though he'd never admit it, was drawn to Riley's razor-sharp intellect. She didn't just catch contract errors, she countered him like an assassin in the courtroom, every word a precise strike. One late night, as they worked together, Riley glanced at Julian, reading documents with his usual serious expression. "You know, Whitmore," she said, her voice softer than usual, "you're a great lawyer, but you live like a machine. When are you going to loosen up a bit?" Julian looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. "Loosen up? If I loosen up, who's going to run this company? Who's going to ensure justice?" Riley smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Justice isn't always about winning cases, Whitmore. Sometimes it's about letting yourself be happy." Her words hung in the air, like testimony no one dared to challenge. Julian didn't respond, but his gaze softened, and for the first time, he wondered if Riley Quinn might be the one to make him rethink not just the law but his heart. After 2 weeks of cohabitation, Julian Whitmore's penthouse had become a peculiar battlefield, where legal sparring mingled with moments that left both parties flustered. Riley Quinn, with her explosive energy and razor-sharp wit, had left her mark on the once frigid space. Jazz tunes still filled the mornings, omelet plates appeared on the dining table, and Julian, though he'd never admit it, had grown accustomed to her presence. But in the third week, an unexpected event shook their fragile balance, thrusting them into an unnamed case, the case of their hearts. On Friday afternoon, Riley was in the living room, cross-legged on the sofa, surrounded by Apex Pharmaceuticals files. She chewed her pen, muttering about a vague insurance clause, when the doorbell rang. Julian, working at the dining table with his laptop, glanced up, his gray eyes sharp. "Did you invite someone, Quinn?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Riley shrugged, standing. "No, unless you think I'm hosting a secret lawyer party." She opened the door and her smile faltered. Standing there was Ethan Caldwell, her ex-boyfriend, a corporate lawyer with a charming smile and a perfectly tailored gray suit. He held a bouquet of white lilies, looking like he'd stepped out of a cologne ad. "Riley," Ethan said, his voice warm but slightly awkward, I want to talk. I owe you an apology." Riley blinked, her mind reeling. She and Ethan had broken up over a year ago, when he chose his career over supporting her whistleblowing at Kessler & Klein. He'd called her decision self-destructive, and she'd responded by throwing his promise ring in the trash. Now he stood here, with flowers and remorseful eyes, as if time could erase the hurt. "Ethan," Riley said, her voice stiff, "what are you doing here? I don't recall sending you a subpoena." Ethan gave a small laugh, stepping forward, still as sharp as ever. "I just want to say, I was wrong, Riley. When you left Kessler & Klein, I should have stood by you. I want to make it right." Julian from the dining table stopped typing. He didn't look up, but his ears perked like a lawyer hearing critical testimony. He caught Riley's voice softer than usual, and when he glanced over, he saw her smile. A small one, but enough to tighten his chest. Why was she smiling at this guy? Riley crossed her arms, her eyes wary. "Make it right? Ethan, you said exposing my boss was an unwinnable case. Now you've changed your tune because I'm with Whitmore and Company? Or because you need an ally in the legal world?" Ethan shook his head, stepping closer. "No, Riley. I realized I lost someone special. I want us to try again." He held out the flowers, his eyes sincere. Julian stood, moving with a chilling calm. He walked to the door, his face expressionless, and pressed the elevator button. "The elevator from the 48th floor takes about 45 seconds, he said, his voice icy. "I suggest you leave before I call security for trespassing." Ethan turned, startled to see Julian, tall, commanding, exuding the aura of a lawyer ready to crush an opponent. "And who are you?" Ethan asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. "Julian Whitmore, owner of this apartment," Julian replied, his gaze locked on Ethan. "And I don't appreciate uninvited guests. Shall I escort you downstairs?" Riley, caught between them, felt the air crackle like a courtroom about to erupt. She snatched the flowers from Ethan's hand, set them on the table, and said, "Ethan, thanks for the apology, but I don't have time for closed cases. I'm busy with bigger things now." She pointed to the door. "You should go." Ethan hesitated, but Julian's cold stare and Riley's resolve left him no choice. He nodded, stepped into the elevator, and as the doors closed, Riley turned to Julian, raising an eyebrow. "Escorting guests lawyer-style, Whitmore?" You were one step away from reading him his Miranda rights. Julian shrugged, returning to the table. But Riley noticed his hands were clenched tighter than usual. She stepped closer, standing by the door, and heard him mutter, his voice low like a confession. I don't know if I'm mad because of him, or because you smiled at someone else. Riley froze, her heart racing. She looked at him, Julian Whitmore, the man who controlled everything, now revealing a crack in his icy armor. She forced a laugh, hiding the warmth spreading through her. Jealous, boss? I thought you only knew litigation, not feelings. Julian didn't reply, just looked at her, his eyes deep like a contract with no clear clauses. And in that moment, Riley knew. They'd crossed the line from colleagues, from lawyers, into something far more dangerous. That night after dinner, a pizza ordered from a nearby Italian place, because Riley declared lawyers need carbs too, they sat in the living room, bathed in soft golden light. Riley sprawled on the sofa, legs draped over the armrest, while Julian sat across from her, a glass of red wine in hand, his gaze distant. Miles Davis's jazz played from the speaker, and the atmosphere felt intimate, as if the apartment was no longer a battlefield but a sanctuary. Riley broke the silence, her voice soft. You know, Whitmore, being a lawyer can be lonely sometimes, always caught between reason and emotion, always having to win, but no one asks if you're tired. Julian looked at her, his wine glass pausing midair. Lonely, he repeated, his voice low. You, the woman who turns this place into a courtroom every day. Lonely? Riley smiled, but her eyes were sad. Yeah, I fight for justice, but at the end of the day, I go home alone, with files and the fear I'll never do enough. What about you, Whitmore? You run a legal empire, but do you ever feel empty? Her words struck like a blade, hitting the wound Julian always hid. He set his glass down, leaning forward, his voice quiet. I learned not to feel, Quinn. In this business, emotions are a weakness. Reason is the only thing that keeps me standing. Riley sat up, her eyes locking onto his. That's not living, Julian. That's surviving. And I bet you're tired of pretending to be a machine. The air between them grew heavy, like testimony no one dared to challenge. Julian looked at her, his gaze no longer cold, but filled with longing, not just for Riley, but for the idea that he could let go of reason, even for a moment. Riley, her heart pounding, sensed the shift. She didn't know why, but she wanted to be closer, to break the wall he'd built. She stood, walked to his chair, and sat beside him. If I sued you for concealing emotions, she said, her tone playful, but her eyes serious, how would you plead? Julian smiled, a sad smile. I'd plead guilty, Quinn, but only on one condition. You'd have to be the judge. They fell silent, inches apart. And then, as if silently agreeing to abandon every rule, Julian reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, as if afraid she'd vanish. Riley didn't pull away. She leaned in and their lips met. Not a kiss born of lust, but of a moment where both let go of reason. It was soft yet intense, like a vow needing no signature. When they parted, breaths heavy, Riley laughed softly, her voice trembling. Well, Whitmore, that's a breach of our cohabitation contract, the personal space clause. Julian chuckled, pulling her closer. I'll take every charge, Quinn, but I warn you, I'm a good lawyer, and I won't let you win easily. They sat there in the golden light and jazz, saying nothing more, but both knew that kiss wasn't just a moment. It was the start of a case they both wanted to lose. After 3 weeks of cohabitation, Julian Whitmore's penthouse was no longer a sterile law office, but a vibrant space where Riley Quinn and Julian's legal sparring intertwined with moments of warmth. Beneath the laughter and jazz, however, both carried scars from their past, secrets they hadn't shared until fate forced them to confront them. One rainy evening, Riley was rummaging through the bookshelf in Julian's study, searching for a contract law document. She accidentally knocked over an old leather-bound photo album, its worn brown cover hitting the floor. As she picked it up, a photo slipped out, a younger Julian in a tuxedo, standing beside a blonde woman in a wedding dress. His smile in the picture was radiant, a stark contrast to the cold demeanor Riley knew. Curiosity got the better of her, and she flipped through, finding a folded note in elegant handwriting. "Julian, I'm sorry. You deserve someone who truly loves you. I don't have enough for you. Lauren." Riley froze, her heart tightening. She hadn't meant to invade Julian's privacy, but the note was like testimony unveiling a past he'd never mentioned. She returned the album to its place, but the image of Julian in a tuxedo, eyes full of hope, haunted her. That night when Julian returned from a meeting, Riley couldn't hold back her question. They sat in the living room, soft golden light around them, the sound of rain tapping the windows. "Whitmore," Riley began, her voice hesitant, "I accidentally saw a photo. You were engaged, weren't you?" Julian stiffened, his wine glass pausing midair. His eyes darkened, as if she'd touched a forbidden statute. "You went through my things, Quinn?" he asked, his tone low but not angry. "Not on purpose," Riley replied, crossing her arms. "But I'm a lawyer. I notice when something's being hidden. Your fiancée left you, didn't she? Right before the wedding?" Julian set his glass down, stood and walked to the window, staring at the rain-soaked Manhattan streets. Silence stretched, and Riley thought he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke, his voice heavy like a verdict. "Lauren, she said I wasn't emotional enough, that I lived like a machine. She left 3 days before the wedding. After that, I decided to trust only contracts in the law. They don't betray you." Riley's chest ached. She'd always thought Julian's coldness was a choice, but now she understood. It was his shield. She stood, joining him at the window. "I'm sorry, Julian, but you're not a machine. I've seen you laugh, seen you care, even if you try to hide it." Julian turned to her, his eyes deep. "What about you, Quinn? You've got secrets too, don't you? The daughter of a prestigious legal family, but you threw it all away to expose your boss. Why?" Riley took a deep breath, feeling vulnerable for the first time in front of him. "My family, they wanted me to take over, to be a high-profile lawyer, work for big corporations. But I saw them compromise with people like my old boss, people who used money to bend justice. I refused, and they called me a traitor. When I exposed Kessler and Klein, I lost everything: family, career, reputation. But I don't regret it. I just wanted to live by my principles." Julian looked at her, his gaze no longer cold but filled with admiration. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Riley. But do you ever fear you're not good enough?" His question cut like a knife, and Riley turned away, hiding the sting in her eyes. She didn't answer, but a seed of self-doubt took root. A few days later, Julian's mother, Eleanor Whitmore, a formidable figure in New York's elite, arrived at the penthouse. Dressed in a Chanel suit, she carried the aura of a Supreme Court justice. Julian had warned Riley that his mother was demanding, but Riley wasn't prepared for how the encounter would shake her. "You're Riley Quinn, correct?" Eleanor said, her voice sharp yet polite, as they sat in the living room. "Julian mentioned you're a lawyer, but I heard you lost your job due to some controversy?" Riley forced a smile, keeping her composure. "I left Kessler and Klein on principle, ma'am. I don't regret it." Eleanor sipped her tea, her eyes scanning Riley like a contract. "Principles are admirable, but Julian needs stability, not a girl who stirs trouble. He's a CEO. He requires someone suited to that role." Her words hit Riley like a punch. She looked at Julian, hoping he'd object, but he remained silent, his expression unreadable. When Eleanor left, Riley felt smaller than ever. She thought of Julian's past, the perfect fiancé, the canceled wedding, and wondered if she, an unemployed lawyer with a messy history, could ever measure up. That night, in the temporary hotel room Julian had arranged, Riley couldn't sleep. Staring at her reflection, she muttered, "Who am I to think I belong with Julian Whitmore? He needs perfection, not a troublemaker like me." In a moment of weakness, she decided to leave, not forever, but to find herself. She left a note. "I need time, Whitmore. Don't worry, I won't abandon the Apex case." Then she went to the Rusty Gavel, the bar where she'd once drafted her whistleblowing complaint, now a daytime cafe. In her familiar corner, Riley opened her laptop, rereading her old complaint. The words reminded her of her resilience, of why she'd chosen this path. She realized Julian wasn't drawn to her because she was perfect, but because she fought, because she was herself. But before she could stand, the cafe door opened and Julian walked in, his shirt damp from the rain, holding a mock file titled, Case, Riley Quinn v. Self-Doubt. Riley laughed, tears streaming down her face. "You're insane, Whitmore. What is this?" Julian sat across from her, opening the file, his voice serious as if in court. Exhibit 1. Riley Quinn made the defendant, Julian Whitmore, laugh for the first time in 5 years. Exhibit 2. She works tirelessly, catching contract errors in 3 minutes and daring to challenge a corporation. Exhibit 3. She made the defendant believe in love again. He looked up, his eyes soft. The plaintiff, Riley Quinn, is not permitted to abandon the defendant, Julian Whitmore, because he loves her. Riley covered her mouth, laughing through tears. "You're the worst lawyer I've ever seen," she said, her voice trembling. "But I plead guilty." Julian stood, pulling her into his arms. They embraced in the cafe, under the curious gazes of a few patrons. "You thought I wanted perfection?" he whispered. "Riley, you're the only one who makes me feel I don't need to be perfect." A week later, a storm hit. Riley's former boss, Richard Kessler, filed a lawsuit against her for leaking confidential information and violating professional ethics. The suit was a revenge tactic, targeting her reputation and future. Though resilient, Riley felt the weight of the pressure. But Julian didn't let her face it alone. In Manhattan's courthouse, Julian stepped in as Riley's defense attorney. Dressed in a black suit, he carried the presence of a warrior, and before reporters, he declared, "Riley Quinn is the most honest lawyer I know. She's not just my colleague, she's my girlfriend, and I'll defend her to the end." Riley, seated in the defendant's row, felt her heart stop. Julian presented evidence, dismantling Kessler's claims with the precision of a top litigator. He proved the leaked information was publicly available and that Kessler had abused his power to silence Riley. The jury agreed, and the case was dismissed. After the trial, Riley ran to Julian outside the courthouse, tears of joy in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Going public as my boyfriend, that was a huge risk." Julian smiled, pulling her close. "I'm a lawyer, Quinn. I know risks, and you're the most worthwhile case I've ever fought." They stood under New York's sunlight, their newfound trust built on old scars. The painful past was no longer a burden, but proof they'd found each other. Two lawyers, two hearts, ready to fight for justice and love. On Monday morning at the headquarters of Whitmore and Company in central Manhattan, the atmosphere was taut as a bowstring. The gleaming glass building, a symbol of legal power, today became the stage for an unprecedented event. A press conference called by Julian Whitmore himself, the genius lawyer and CEO. Reporters from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and even tabloids like Page 6 crowded the conference room, cameras flashing relentlessly, microphones clustered around the podium. Rumors spread like wildfire. Whitmore and Company was about to announce a major deal, or worse, a scandal tied to the Apex Pharmaceuticals lawsuit. But no one could have predicted that this press conference would turn into an emotional trial where Julian Whitmore, the man of reason, would wage a war for love. Riley Quinn stood backstage, her heart pounding. She wore a navy business dress, her auburn hair tied up high, striving to maintain the calm demeanor of a lawyer. But inside, she was a whirlwind of emotions. Just days ago, Julian had defended her in court, publicly calling her his girlfriend while confronting a lawsuit from her former boss, Richard Kessler. That move had set the media ablaze with headlines like "Young Lawyer Trouble" or "Whitmore's Secret Lover" flooding the newsstands. Riley hated the spotlight, but Julian had convinced her this press conference was necessary, not to quash rumors, but to set things right, as he'd said with a cryptic look in his eyes. "You okay, Quinn?" Julian asked, stepping beside her, his black suit hugging his tall frame. His gray eyes studied her, both gentle and resolute, like a lawyer preparing for trial. Riley quirked her lips, trying to mask her nerves. "Okay, I feel like I've been subpoenaed as a witness in a case I don't even know the charges for. What are you going to tell that press mob, Whitmore? And don't tell me to trust you like some cheesy romance flick." Julian chuckled softly, a rare sound that eased Riley's tension. "I'm a lawyer, not an actor, Quinn, but today I need you to stand there. Not as a witness, but as my partner." Riley raised an eyebrow, her heart racing. "Partner? In law or something else?" Julian didn't answer, only winked and stepped onto the podium. The crowd fell silent, camera flashes erupting like fireworks. Riley stood in the wings, gripping her hands, unsure what to expect. But as Julian began to speak, she realized this wasn't just a press conference, it was a vow. Julian stood tall, hands resting on the podium, his presence commanding as if addressing a jury. His voice was deep, clear, resonating through the room. "Thank you all for coming. I'm Julian Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore & Company, and today I'm here to address the rumors surrounding our firm and myself. But first, I want to talk about a case, not a legal one, but a case of the heart." The reporters stirred, pens scribbling furiously. Riley from backstage felt her face heat up. "Case of the heart?" she muttered. "Is he really turning me into a page 6 headline?" Julian continued, his gaze sweeping the crowd, but Riley felt he was speaking to her. "Whitmore & Company was recently dragged into a lawsuit involving Apex Pharmaceuticals and one of our lawyers, Riley Quinn. She was falsely accused of leaking information, a retaliatory strike by those who fear the truth. I defended her in court, not just because she's an exceptional lawyer, but because she's the most important woman in my life." Whispers rippled through the room, cameras flashing nonstop. Riley covered her mouth, her eyes stinging. She was used to the cold, sharp Julian, but this man, standing before the world to protect her, was a Julian she'd never seen. Julian raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "I'm CEO Julian Whitmore, a man who's always lived by reason, believing that law and contracts solve every problem. But today, I stand here as a man in love with Riley Quinn." He turned toward the wings, his eyes locking onto hers. "Riley, you're not just the best lawyer I know. You're the one who made me believe that justice isn't only in the courtroom, but in loving and protecting those we cherish." The conference room exploded. Reporters thrust microphones forward, shouting questions. "Mr. Whitmore, how long have you been dating? Does Ms. Quinn influence the firm's strategy?" But Riley heard nothing. She stepped out from the wings, legs trembling but eyes steady. She stood beside Julian, and for the first time in her life, she, the woman always ready with a sharp retort, didn't argue. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from shame, but from uncontainable happiness. Julian took her hand, his fingers interlocking with hers like a promise needing no signature. He faced the crowd, his voice firm. "Riley Quinn is not a troublemaker. She's a lawyer who dares to stand for justice, and I'm proud to stand with her. As for the rumors, this is the only answer you need. She is my future, in and out of the courtroom." The crowd applauded, some reporters smiled, others scribbled frantically. Riley, still holding Julian's hand, whispered, "You're insane, Whitmore. You just made us a national headline." Julian tilted his head, smiling. "I'm a lawyer, Quinn. I know the risks, and you're the most worthwhile case I've ever fought." After the press conference, the room emptied, leaving only Julian and Riley under the dim lights. She wiped her tears, trying to regain her confidence. "You know, I could sue you for making me cry in public. That's a breach of our maintaining dignity clause in our cohabitation contract." Julian laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Sue me? Fine, but I'll counter-sue for making me lose my rationality, and I have evidence. Last night's kiss." Riley blushed, recalling the moment they let go of reason in his penthouse. She playfully punched his chest, her tone teasing. "You're the worst lawyer, Whitmore. But thank you for standing up for me." Julian lifted her chin, his eyes tender yet intense. "I didn't just stand up for you, Riley. I stood up for us, and I'll do it again, as many times as it takes." They kissed, a slow, deep kiss, as if the world with its cameras, headlines, and rumors had vanished. When they parted, Riley smiled, no longer hiding her emotions. You know, Whitmore, I think I love you too. But don't let that hit the papers. Julian laughed heartily, holding her tighter. No promises, Quinn, but I promise to spend my life proving it to you. The press conference became legendary among New York's legal circles. Articles dubbed Julian Manhattan's most romantic CEO, while Riley was hailed as the fearless lawyer who captured a powerful heart. But to them, the headlines didn't matter. They left the conference room hand in hand, stepping onto the streets of New York, where the sunlight shone like a final verdict. They had won not just a lawsuit, but a battle for love. The penthouse of Julian Whitmore, a month after the legendary press conference, had truly become a home. The glass walls overlooking Manhattan now reflected not just sunlight, but the warm moments between Julian Whitmore and Riley Quinn. Jazz music still played every morning, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with playful legal debates, and the two had learned to live together, not just as lawyers, but as two people deeply in love. But on an early autumn morning, Julian was preparing to launch a new case, one not about contracts or justice, but about the heart. Riley woke up in the penthouse's guest room, which she had officially moved into after their 30-day cohabitation contract ended. She stretched, sunlight filtering through the blinds and catching her tousled auburn hair. Today was a rare day off for Whitmore and Company, and she had planned a lazy day, reading a legal thriller, sipping coffee, and teasing Julian until he surrendered in one of their verbal sparring matches. But as she entered the kitchen, she froze. On the walnut dining table, usually piled with case files, sat a single black folder tied with a red ribbon. Scrawled on top, in Julian's bold handwriting, were the words, Riley Quinn versus Julian Whitmore. The case of marriage. Riley blinked, her heart racing. What the hell is this? She muttered, though a smile tugged at her lips. She glanced around, seeing no sign of Julian, only hearing the sound of running water from the bathroom, a sign he was getting ready for the day. She pulled out a chair, sat down, and opened the folder, her curiosity as sharp as a lawyer's before $1 million contract. The first page made her burst out laughing. Clause 1. Riley Quinn shall be the wife of Julian Whitmore. Clause 2. If Julian Whitmore is wrong, refer to Clause 1. Clause 3. Both parties pledge to love, respect, and engage in fair legal arguments forever. Below was a blank space for signatures, with an ink pen placed beside it. Riley flipped through, finding the rest written like a genuine contract, but filled with humorous details. Subclause 4.2. Riley Quinn reserves the right to demand scrambled eggs each morning, provided she does not spill coffee on documents. Subclause 5.1. Julian Whitmore commits to refraining from legal jargon in at least one conversation per day. She laughed until tears streamed down her face, but her heart felt strangely warm. This wasn't just a proposal, it was Julian, the man who lived by the law, pouring his heart into a case to win her. She heard footsteps and Julian entered, his hair still damp, dressed in a white dress shirt and black slacks. He paused, his gray eyes glinting as he saw Riley holding the contract. "Read it yet, Quinn?" he asked, his voice low but tinged with rare nervousness. Riley stood, crossing her arms, her gaze challenging. "Read it, Whitmore. But this is the worst contract I've ever seen. No exit clause, no contingency plan. You think I'd sign a legally flimsy document like this?" Julian stepped closer, standing just a few feet away, a smirk playing on his lips. "I'm a lawyer, Quinn. I know how to draft an ironclad contract. But if you want to negotiate, I'm all ears." Riley tilted her head, pretending to consider. "Fine. I want an additional clause. Julian Whitmore must admit Riley Quinn is the best lawyer he's ever met, at least once a week, in front of witnesses." Julian laughed, the warm sound filling the kitchen. "Motion denied, as that's an obvious fact that doesn't need codifying." He stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers, gentle yet intense. "Riley, I'm serious. I want you to be my wife, not because I need a legal partner, but because I need you. The woman who makes me laugh, makes me live, and makes me believe love is worth fighting for." Riley felt her chest tighten. She was used to the sharp, arrogant Julian, but the man before her now bared his heart without reservation. She picked up the pen, pretending to review the contract, but her eyes blurred with tears. "You know, Whitmore," she said, her voice trembling, "if this were a case, I'd lose, because I have no grounds to object." She signed her name, her strokes firm yet emotional. Then she slid the contract toward him, her eyes sparkling. "Your turn, defendant. Sign it or I'll sue you for breach of promise." Julian took the pen, signing without breaking eye contact. When he set the pen down, they looked at each other, then burst into laughter, bright, radiant laughs, as if they'd never been strangers waking up in that fateful hotel room. Julian pulled her into his arms, and they held each other in the sunlit kitchen, as if the world contained only them. That afternoon, Julian took Riley to a secret location, the New York Supreme Court, where he had arranged a special trial. Not to sign marriage papers, that would come later, but to stage a lawyer-style proposal true to their spirits. The small courtroom, typically used for civil cases, was now simply decorated with white lilies and candles. A friend of Julian's, Judge Margaret Hayes, had agreed to preside over the ceremony, her smile mischievous. Riley, in a simple yet elegant white dress, entered the courtroom, her heart pounding. Julian stood in the center in a black suit, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. Judge Hayes tapped her gavel, her voice playful. "Today's session, Riley Quinn versus Julian Whitmore, is convened to consider a unique case, the case of marriage. Counsel, please present your arguments." Julian stepped forward, holding a sheet of paper, a mock brief he'd prepared. He looked at Riley, his voice deep but laden with emotion. "Your Honor, the defendant, Julian Whitmore, submits the following. Evidence 1. Riley Quinn has transformed my life, from a man of pure reason to one who dares to love. Evidence 2. She's the only lawyer who beats me in every argument, and I'm willing to lose to her for life. Evidence 3. I cannot imagine a future where she isn't by my side, in court or in life. Therefore, I move that this court rule. Riley Quinn must become my wife forever." Riley covered her mouth, laughing and crying at once. She stepped forward, pretending to hold a counter brief. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaky but sharp, "the plaintiff, Riley Quinn, admits all charges, but I request one additional clause. Julian Whitmore must promise to always argue with me, because that's how we love." Judge Hayes laughed heartily, banging her gavel. "Ruling. Both parties win. I hereby sentence Riley Quinn and Julian Whitmore to life, in love." The small group of invited friends, a few Whitmore and Company lawyers and Riley's best friend, erupted in applause. Julian pulled a simple yet exquisite ring from his pocket, a small diamond sparkling. He knelt, his eyes never leaving hers. "Riley Quinn, will you be my wife?" Riley nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I plead guilty, Whitmore." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed amid cheers and candlelight, like the sweetest verdict ever delivered. After the trial, Julian and Riley returned to the penthouse, hand in hand. They sat on the sofa, bathed in golden lamplight, and Riley rested her head on his shoulder. "You know," she teased, "your marriage contract still has loopholes. No clause about who makes the scrambled eggs every morning?" Julian chuckled, kissing her forehead. "I'll add an addendum, Quinn, but you know I'm no chef. That's why I need you for life." Riley playfully pinched him, her eyes gleaming. "Life's a long sentence, Whitmore. You sure you can handle me?" Julian pulled her closer, his voice low but certain. "I'm a lawyer, Quinn. I've calculated every risk, and you're the case I want to fight forever." They sat there, in the penthouse that had once been a battlefield and was now a home, laughing together as if they'd never been strangers. Julian's lawyerly proposal wasn't just a contract. It was a vow that they'd write a story together. Needing no clauses, only love. Spring in New York brought a refreshing breeze, weaving through the bustling streets of Manhattan. In a modest glass building in the Flatiron District, the law office of Quinn and Whitmore stood tall, like a beacon for those forgotten by the legal system. Just 6 months after Julian Whitmore's lawyerly proposal, he and Riley Quinn had turned their shared dream into reality. A law firm dedicated to those wronged by an unjust system, exploited workers, families displaced by fraudulent contracts, and individuals crushed by the system. The lavish penthouse that was once their battleground had become their home, while this office was the legacy of their love and justice. On a Saturday morning, the Quinn and Whitmore office buzzed with more energy than usual. Riley, in a navy blazer and pencil skirt, stood at the conference table, explaining a case to a new client. Maria Delgado, a single mother wrongfully fired after taking leave to care for her sick child. Riley flipped through files, her green eyes sharp, her voice firm yet warm. Ms. Delgado, under New York labor law, they had no right to terminate your contract without notice. We'll sue for wrongful termination and seek compensation. I promise we'll make them pay. Ms. Delgado, her eyes red, clasped Riley's hand. Ms. Quinn, I don't have much money, but I trust you. Thank you for listening. Riley smiled, resting her hand on Ms. Delgado's. Don't worry about the money, Ms. Delgado. At Quinn and Whitmore, justice doesn't come with a price tag. Just be a strong witness, and we'll win. From the corner of the room, Julian watched, his gray eyes glinting with pride. Dressed in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, he was reviewing a pro bono contract for a nonprofit. Julian Whitmore, once the iron-fisted leader of Whitmore & Company, was now a lawyer for social justice, and he had never been happier. This transformation began with Riley. She didn't just win his heart, she made him rethink the true meaning of the law. As Ms. Delgado left, Riley sank into a chair beside Julian, exhaling. This case will be tough, Whitmore. Her employer has a team of lawyers from a big firm, but I found a loophole in their labor contract, a clause violating family leave laws. Julian raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. Not bad, Quinn, but don't get cocky. I bet I can find another loophole before you file the suit. Riley playfully punched his shoulder, her eyes sparkling with challenge. A bet? Fine, defendant. If you lose, you're making scrambled eggs for a week. If I lose, I'll let you pick the music instead of jazz for a day. Julian laughed, pulling her closer. You just signed a verbal contract without reading the fine print, Quinn. I'll pick country music, and you'll regret it. Riley feigned a shudder, but her smile was radiant. Moments like these, legal sparring mixed with teasing, proved that their love needed no clauses, only harmony. By afternoon, the office grew quiet as staff left for the day. Julian and Riley stayed behind, finalizing paperwork for another low-income client. Jamal Carter, a construction worker denied compensation after a workplace injury. They had won his case the previous week, forcing the company to cover medical bills and damages. Today, they were signing the final documents to transfer the settlement to Mr. Carter. Riley sat at the conference table, signing papers, her focus intense. Julian stood behind her, a hand resting lightly on her shoulder, reviewing the documents. When she finished signing, she leaned back in her chair, looking at him with a tired but satisfied smile. Do you think there's a lawyer out there who wins every case? She asked, her tone half teasing. Julian sat beside her, his eyes soft but gleaming. There is. Her name's Riley Quinn, and she won my heart. Riley laughed, but tears shimmered in her eyes. She rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. You're the cheesiest lawyer I've ever met, Whitmore. But I'll take the compliment. Julian kissed her hair, whispering, Not a compliment, Quinn. It's the final ruling. They sat there in the quiet office, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. The stacks of files on the table were no longer burdens, but evidence of their mission. Quinn and Whitmore was more than a law firm. It was a symbol of love and justice, where two once opposing hearts now fought together for what was right. That weekend, Julian and Riley hosted a small party at the penthouse to celebrate 6 months since opening their firm. The guests included close friends, Quinn and Whitmore's staff, and a few former clients like Miss Delgado, who had won her case and brought homemade cookies as thanks. The penthouse was filled with laughter, the scent of New York pizza, and Ella Fitzgerald's jazz. Riley's choice, naturally. While everyone chatted, Riley pulled Julian onto the balcony, where they gazed at Manhattan's twinkling lights. She wore a simple red dress, her auburn hair loose, while Julian, in a black shirt, held a glass of wine. She leaned against the railing, her eyes sparkling. You know, Whitmore, 6 months ago, I thought you were an arrogant CEO who lived by contracts. Now look at us. running a law firm, hosting a party with Ms. Delgado's cookies, and in love. Julian smiled, setting his glass down and pulling her into his arms. You left out one detail, Quinn. 6 months ago, I thought you were a troublemaking lawyer who invaded my penthouse. Turns out you were the biggest, most worthwhile case I've ever fought. Riley pinched him lightly, but her eyes were soft. So, what's your ruling, counselor? Julian lifted her chin, his gaze deep. Ruling. Julian Whitmore is sentenced to life with Riley Quinn. No clauses, no loopholes. And he has no intention of appealing. They kissed under the city lights, a slow, sweet kiss like a vow needing no gavel. When they parted, Riley whispered, I concur with the ruling, Whitmore. But don't expect me to stop arguing with you. Julian laughed heartily, holding her tighter. I'm counting on it, Quinn. In the months that followed, Quinn and Whitmore continued to grow, earning respect among New York's legal community. They won more cases, from securing back wages for a group of workers to defending a community organization against land seizure. Each victory was proof that justice, though hard-won, was always worth fighting for. But for Julian and Riley, the greatest victory wasn't in the courtroom, it was in the quiet moments. Mornings making scrambled eggs, nights reviewing files together, and the times they held hands, knowing they had found not just love, but purpose. One evening, as they sat on the penthouse sofa, Riley opened a bottle of wine and raised her glass. To us, Whitmore. To a life without clauses, and to the cases we'll win together. Julian clinked his glass with hers, his eyes gleaming. To you, Quinn. The woman who sued my heart and won without a gavel. They drank, laughed, and embraced in the penthouse that had sparked their fateful story. From two strangers waking up in a hotel room, they had become partners, in law, in love, and in a life that needed no clauses, only each other.